So thank you all for being here today. My name is Holly Amaya, and I'm the Executive Director of CharterSource. And today in our board chat, we are going to cover special education, what boards need to know about special education. Just a little bit about CharterSource if you're not familiar. Our vision is to strengthen and transform the school landscape to generate more equitable and high quality education options for children. And we do that by providing scaffolded support and development in governance, leadership, and operations for school improvement. And today we wanted to bring in our friends from Indigo Education since they are the experts in special education. And we're going to be covering the role charter school board members play in understanding special education funding and as it relates to their responsibility to support district-led special education programs. We'll also highlight the legal and financial obligations charter schools hold under special education law, reinforcing the importance of compliance with IDEA and ensuring that all students receive a free and appropriate public education. And from there, I will hand it over to our presenters, Dr. Erin Lavery and Hannah Peterson. Take it away, Indigo.
Hi, my name is Erin Lavery. I am the Executive Director of Indigo Education and also have served as a Director of Special Education for a number of years. Hannah?
Good morning. My name is Hannah Peterson, a Director of Operations at Indigo Education, and also wear many hats, including special education teacher and general education teacher, and I have worn all of them over the years. So a little bit about Indigo Education. Some of you we've partnered with or know of us, but we're a nonprofit organization that will be celebrating our 30th birthday coming up here next year. So as a nonprofit, we work to strengthen public education by enhancing and improving special education services, educator development, and ensuring all students receive the high quality education they deserve. And again, professional relationships, being here together is really important to us. So again, we are always learning and growing. We're very responsible in trying to make sure that we are always engaging with others. So the Department of Education, we're always learning and growing from the program finance team, program monitoring, again, with a lot of the acts that are coming through and legislative supports, Compass and MTSS and school discipline. Indigo Education currently has a partnership and a pathway grant through the Department of Education. And we are working to get more licensed educators in the field.
So at our organization, we have developed something called the See It framework. And in the See It framework, from our perspective, we have come to the conclusion, based on research, that there are 5 areas in which a school can work towards building a meaningful special education program. And without going into too many details here, that the definitions are below each of the words. Those are family engagement, a strong and healthy school climate, evidence-based curriculum instruction for the children, compliance with IEPs, meaning we meet the state and federal guidelines, and then solid instructional practices. So yes, we have the curriculum to be working with the children, but then also our delivery is also based in research and then has that strong relational component, because when we have engagement, that really leads to long-term positive projections for students. And on the next slide here, you'll see a visual, and I'm not quite sure how it comes across on your screen, but we really work with our schools to, evaluate where they're at and move schools from accountability to alignment and then integration, knowing that a school may really have a lot of strengths in IEP compliance and school climate, but then needs support in these other areas. And again, the goal is to always make progress, knowing that progress is slow and frankly, just moving forward is the goal to help students confer benefit from their programming and then also for the retention of teachers. And it's interesting because school special education finance does have a strong link to the aforementioned components in that U.S. school board members, and I'm just going to check the chat here, U.S. school board members and authorizers and leaders in your school really can look to school finance as a way to understand, but then also ask really non-invasive questions to your school leaders and the business managers who support your school. Just really asking for some data-based information and then asking follow-up questions from there. Because we do know that while there's anecdotal information that we can gather from teachers and administrators about the efficacy of program, your special education finance reports should also substantiate the qualitative information that you're getting from your school leaders. So there are 4 ways that schools, and I'm just going to talk about charter schools in this case here, that our charter school community receives funding to support their special education programming. And so those are listed on the next 2 slides. In particular, we see that we get funding from the federal government, and through the special education legislation, special education programming is supposed to be fully funded, and we know that is really a false narrative and certainly not happening. So schools receive federal funds based on the number of children that receive special education services and the children who are receiving free and reduced lunch and other programming like that. The next way that schools receive funding is through the state of Minnesota. And that, again, is based on student enrollment and then our current year expenditures. So in collaboration with your school finance, probably contracted service provider, and your special education lead staff, and your school administrator, they put together or share information that has been approved from the budget that boards have knowledge of, right? And you approve. We communicate those expenditures to the state of Minnesota, and they pay us a portion, us meaning charter schools, a portion of our expenditures. Then if you can go back 1 slide, love. Another funding source is called third-party billing, or we call it MA. And so one question you can ask as a board member is just to, gently ask the question about, what's our school's MA or third-party billing process, and are we doing that? So while I'm sharing that idea, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, it does call for funding from the state, from the feds, and then other funding sources. And that funding source refers to medical assistance. And while medical assistance is, or third-party billing is a required practice for schools, I do want to say that if your school is having a challenge in this area, it is a complicated system to get up and running because it really requires a nuanced conversation with caregivers, because we are asking them to opt in and share some information about their insurance, which automatically puts up some barriers and becomes complicated. The system, the third-party billing, doesn't charge families their insurance and become really invasive, but parents do need to give us permission to seek out the way that their family is insured. So again, this conversation usually is facilitated by one of your lead special education administrators or teachers. And again, it just takes some finesse and relationship to convey the way in which the school is going to be gentle and respectful with the private information. So some of your schools may have started third-party billing in terms of connecting with your speech therapists or occupational therapists. That's really the two areas in which schools kind of get this operation, if you will, up and running. The next way in which our schools receive funding is through a process called tuition billing. And that tuition billing is based on a formula in which the resident district of the child is fiscally responsible for the special education programming at our charter schools. So, for example, if a child lives in Edina and they go to International Spanish Language Academy, Edina pays for a portion, because of course nothing is 100% here, a portion of that child's special education programming at Isla. The tuition billing, kind of the facilitation of the money exchange, and all of that, that's handled by the Department of Education at this point. Can you switch to the next slide, Han? So the interesting piece about tuition billing is that, I will just use Edina as an example, is that Edina builds their special education and general education budgets based on who they're serving and their responsibilities within their school district. And in addition, they have to be mindful that of their tuition billing responsibilities to other tuition-based entities. And so that would be charter schools, but also intermediate school districts. And those school districts have really the privilege to serve children who all have significant needs in the area of their area of their disability. And again, I think something that we as a community need to dispel is that while we call this tuition billing, all charter schools in Minnesota are public schools. And I think that we all share the same frustration when that's not understood. And certainly the charter school model across the United States is quite different from state to state. So a conversation that my team has with all of you, regardless of your position, is how to ensure that our programs at our charter schools are remain free and appropriate and meet the children's needs while also being solid fiscal stewards of the money that we receive from the feds, the state, and then resident districts, essentially. And where there becomes some frustration, and this doesn't, you know this by reading the papers and people just complaining, right? For great reason. I don't want to minimize any of the challenges that resident districts have. I'm just trying to articulate both sides of the situation here. Is that, can you go back to that one slide, Hannah? So while Minneapolis, let's say, has their obligations, like I was saying, they also need to be mindful of their tuition billing or other expenditures. And as a result of their other obligations, for example, FY27, and I think that's actually wrong. I think it's FY28. they need to cut about $50 million from their budget. So, of course, that impacts their programming and their staffing, et cetera. So, why I mention that is, again, for us to be mindful of being solid fiscal stewards and being mindful about the per pupil expenditure that we have at each of our schools. And so a second question in addition to, what's our MA billing practice may be for a board member or an authorizer to ask a question about what is charter school X's per pupil expenditure. Can you move to the next slide, Han? So as you can see here, there is on your one side of the screen, it says total, and that really is kind of should be titled something else. So the type of district or the name of the district, right? And then their special ed ADM, meaning the children who are attending that school, those districts. And then if you scooch over another column, I guess then you can see the per pupil expenditure. So we see that Minneapolis and St. Paul spend around $21,000. Really, I think that estimate is high. I estimate that to be between $15,000 and $16,000. Again, no expenditure for your school as you're looking at your particular data is wrong. It is mindful to know that what the average is, and then how does your school compare to the average, and then does your per pupil expenditure, frankly, like, is it defensible? Does the type of programming that you have and does the progress that you see children making, does that match with your finances? So as well, maybe you're aware of the Blue Ribbon Commission. So the governor created a task force that began at the start of this school year and has been going on through the duration. And our group is required to create a presentation to the governor's appointees regarding a couple of areas pertaining to special education. One area for us to work on is transforming special education, which is a heavy and interesting lift, but that is one of the goals for our group. And then the next area of focus is for our group to find ways that the state of Minnesota can eliminate 300,000, sorry, that's would be so much better, $300 million from the state special education budget. And as we've gone through this process, the group has kind of created some suggestions and whatnot. And without going into too much detail, it's been very clear to us that moving programs that have been currently funded out of the state special education budget and moving that to general education or another funding source, that's not a permissible way to reduce special education funds. It does have to be a complete elimination of expenditures. So I don't need to, this is kind of boring here. And just there's 4 areas in which we're focusing on. And our group is divided into 2 areas. So one pertaining to special education finance and then one pertaining to special education programming. And the individuals who are on that group are listed here on one of our slides. And just for you to know that, the special education cuts of $300 million is a very daunting task. And I do want to really underscore that the individuals that you see here in the finance column really are brilliant individuals who can really provide some solid suggestions. And so while that, the governor's committee may take our suggestions or not, really the group, all of us, but in particular, the special ed finance group is putting forth their best effort to provide some solutions. So an interesting caveat to all of this in terms of the Blue Ribbon Commission is that while the need is to eliminate $300 million from the state special education budget, school districts also have obligations from the state and the feds to provide children with a free and appropriate public education that meets their needs and is underscored by data and best practices while still retaining teachers and school administrators to do all of this. And so a term that we use, and I think probably in your spaces you've heard this term, is called maintenance of effort. And so each school district needs to spend the same or more on their special education programming from year to year. Certainly, there's a couple of ways that we can get around that, but really on the whole, if you spend $100,000 in FY26, which is our current fiscal year, the expectation is that you will spend $100,000 or $100,000.05 for FY27. And so that is an expectation for each of our schools, and it's also an expectation for the state of Minnesota, right? We report to the state, and then the state reports to the feds, and the state of Minnesota needs to spend the same or more per fiscal year to demonstrate maintenance of effort to the federal government. The next few slides we have to share with you today are the 5 domains, if you will, if you can recall from the start of the conversation, the 5 domains of what we believe are the quality indicators for a solid special education program. And so the next slides that Hannah and I have those indicators broken up into segments. And again, when communicating with your school district, if you're going to be addressing school climate, a question that you can ask is about teacher retention and obviously who is staying and who is going, but also where is the school district investing professional development, and are there needs in that area, right? Because we want to be providing mentorship and support so that we have staff building their school or building their skills from year to year after year. And you want to build as much internal capacity as possible and rely less on contracted professionals. So again, communicating with a person like Scott, he will be able to tell you quickly how much, or just yes and no, is are your schools providing their special education staff curriculum, or not, well, sure, but also professional development. The next segment would be curriculum and instruction. And again, this has its own category in your budget that you'll see and approve as board members and certainly authorizers. Are you spending enough money on curriculum that is research-based and evidence-based for school or children to confer benefit and make progress on their goals and objectives? And our goal always in special education is to decrease the population of children who need our services and work our way out of jobs. Yeah. Again, so for instructional practices, it's pretty similar to what I was saying here, but where we're talking about teacher retention, as a board and administrators for special education programming, it is helpful to know that research says that teachers will burn out between 3 and 5 years of teaching. That's a fact. And we need to, as a school, mitigate the factors that can lead to burnout. So again, this is kind of a foregone conclusion that teachers will burn out. And then it's our responsibility to have a strong culture and community and resources for our teachers so they can remain in your building so you have better retention and decreased departure so that you can build a solid special education program. And I mentioned family engagement here, obviously, to ensure that parents are informed of their rights and whatnot, but then also knowing that conflicts in special education are also unavoidable between, staff to staff, but also between families or caregivers and the school. And in terms of expenditures, when we get attorneys involved, the amount of money that you are paying for attorneys, that comes out of your general education budget. It's not paid for out of special education. So the more we can do to collaborate with parents, while it's time intensive, it does save you money on the general education side. And again, working with attorneys is probably not something that you have built into your general ed budget, but does need to be anticipated, right? And that can change from fiscal year to fiscal year. And frankly, professional development for your teachers and administrators in the area of conflict resolution, I believe is a really impactful professional development opportunity because that's not something that is taught in undergrad or postgraduate levels. And it's really a skill that's learned on the job, probably most likely after the fact. A conflict arises and there's some harm done, and then reparations to relationships occur. And I say that because when that happens, that's teacher time. So their FTE is allocated away from children and spent working on something, usually, adult conflict. IEP compliance, really, again, where this is where your teachers are spending, frankly, the majority of their time. So again, as board members or, again, like I said, persons of authority, having a wondering about the workload of your teachers and the manageability thereof and ways that we can help teachers get this requirement accomplished while also meeting their needs to plan for their direct instruction. And there's some creative ways to do this. But again, just asking those questions about how are we supporting children, certainly, but how are we really retaining staff and building capacity? And when we do that, that decreases the conflict both internally in your building and then externally with caregivers. So, as I said at some point here, our school districts need to we need to maintain our expenditures essentially from year after year. But it is helpful for us to think about as a community ways that the charter school community can collaborate more to share resources. And so during this conversation, I've really been talking about individual school districts. And I want to really be mindful that I think that right now is the time that we all need to be thinking about the preservation of the charter school community and collaborating and communicating at a higher and more intense level to be really protecting our space. So, not always in defense, but also questioning, are we continuing to be innovative? Are we continuing to support teachers in a way that traditional public schools aren't? As you know, there's a lot of criticism around charter schools, mostly around expenditures, and it is, I think, an appropriate time for us to be holding each other accountable with grace and unconditional positive regard, while also encouraging each other to operate within best practices and then also share practices that promote efficacy. And again, one easy way to do that is just internally getting your MA billing process up and going. That probably takes one school year to build solid practices. And again, it does take a person with that relational talent, but that is something that, talking about for FY27 can yield results for FY28.
Well, I want to recognize that we're at time, but thank you so much to Dr. Lavery and Hannah Peterson for being here today. And I do encourage you, as they mentioned, to reach out to them at Indigo or us at CharterSource if you have additional questions. And thank you all for taking the time to be here today and learn more about special education and your role on boards in that. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Bye.